One, very excited to be with you today for yet another HelpSystems webinar. Today's topic, Performance Navigator, IBM Power Capacity Planning. We're ready to help you out with Power10. Matter of fact, we've been helping out customers since last September, October timeframe, when the upper scale servers were announced for Power10, the 1080s. And then of course, as the announcements rolled out in July, we've been helping customers already. So welcome everybody to Power10. Rest assure you, for those who are worried about the future, IBM's already working on Power11. That's what I understand. Randy, welcome. What do you do for HelpSystems? And great to have you with me.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Yeah, as most people probably have interacted with a lot of people on the phone, but obviously I focus on Performance Navigator, in particular capacity planning and performance analysis. Those two typically go hand in hand, right? I mean, so spend a lot of time looking at performance data. In fact, that's kind of spend 8 hours a day looking at performance data, sometimes 10 hours a day. So that's sort of what I do, and certainly have fun at doing it.
You are definitely the guru of that. I'm Tom Huntington. I'm our EVP of Technical Solutions. I work with a lot of our customers, recognize a lot of faces out there, so excited to be with you today. I'm also an IBM Power Champion, so I do have a lot of insight into what IBM's doing, so it's exciting to see Power10 this last year and IBM 7.5 come out. Matter of fact, earlier this month, we did a webinar on upgrading from IBM 7.4, 7.3 to 7.5. So if you're looking for tips on that, this is an hour-long webinar on that that's recorded out on our website. Let's get started here, Randy, with our agenda. We're going to just talk briefly about what is Performance Navigator, why Performance Navigator for sizing, demonstration on how you can consolidate AIX and IBM I to your next Power10 server if you want to do that. Of course, you can do it just for IBM I or AIX too. And then we have room for questions, so feel free to send questions as we go along the way. Our first item up is a polling question. We want to know your experience with Performance Navigator, how long you've been using it. Of course, we might have somebody who's never used it before. Certainly choose that. If you haven't, less than 1 year, 1 to 2 years, 2 to 5 years, greater than 5 years. Look at that, Randy. We have a lot of newbies that are with us. As oh, you probably can't see the results yet. So we got results
well,
just coming in.
It's coming. Yep.
Yeah. So next, let's see. What's our next webinar? I'm trying to think off the top of my head. We're doing some things with Common coming up here this fall. Speaking of that, I will be at the Common Navigate Conference in St. Louis, Missouri. Love to see you guys there. We're even going to do a social evening on Tuesday night. So stop by, have a beverage on HelpSystems, come meet some of our staff members. So, all right, all the time we have for this first polling question. Let's look at the results here. It looks like we have 38% have never used it. That's the highest number, so great. That a little overview on what PerfNav is a good idea. 29% that are very experienced with the product, 17% 2 to 5 years, and some inexperienced users too, but you know, we want to be able to educate everybody, don't we, Randy? So here we
Absolutely.
Go.
Yep.
Let's move on to our next topic, which is overview of Performance Navigator. What is it? Who uses Performance Navigator for capacity planning? Well, we do. HelpSystems, of course. IBM Techline, if you don't know that, they actually have a relationship with HelpSystems, and they've been providing capacity plans for customers also, and business partners. And we have business partners that use the tool, and we certainly have customers that are using the tool and doing some of their own capacity planning too. Of course, I say with training. Everybody needs training, needs to understand a lot when it comes to that. We also have managed service providers and who are using this technology, and even cloud vendors today that are using the technology to help size customers and provide their capacity plans when they move to the cloud. You know, at HelpSystems, we have related HelpSystems several services for capacity planning. Of course, we can help you. Send us your information and we will do a plan for you. We also do problem determination for customers. Randy was just talking to me about a large customer that had some unexpected, well, maybe expected uptick in resource consumption, and an interesting story on that. But taking a look at things and why are things growing. A performance analysis, just looking at your box and giving you feedback on where you could change things. We see a lot of things by looking at this performance data. And speaking of that, what HelpSystems has is a free collection process. And what we do is we install on your systems some code like IBM on IBMi. We look at the collection service data and we do a data reduction against that so you can stay more or have more data. On AIX and VIOS, we put a schedule job in cron to help consolidate and collect the NMON data, and the same thing for Linux. So on IBMi, we're using the job scheduler that's built in, or robot schedule if you have that installed for running the collection process. But the key to this is it's free, and you have to have this flight recorder in place running, and the more data we have, the better predictions we're going to do. And right at the bottom, if you install this on your endpoints, which is your individual instances of the IBMi, AIX, and Linux operating systems, then we can keep at least a year worth of data, if not a couple years worth of data, without really greatly impacting your disk consumption. Notice we have 1 to 7 gigabytes worth of consumption on your server itself. So really important to get that installed. If you're thinking about upgrading, get that free agent out there ahead of time. And then, we look at an overview of Performance Navigator and how to navigate this product. We'll see that we can manage IBMi, AIX, VIOS, AIX, and Linux servers. Matter of fact, we could look at Linux NMON data from x86, bring that over to Perf Navigator and say, this is the Power10 server you need to host that Linux data on. But if we look off to the right, we have historical performance metrics. We have management reporting that we can output into HTML. We have customers that get that. They put it out to a shared server inside their infrastructure, and now their management team can see results. Or we have business partners that are MSPs that use that outputs to share performance with their customers. We also do problem determination. What's changed, right? Perf Nav, if we have the collection services or the NMON data, we can share with you what process, what job, what change in disk storage caused the problem on your system. But without the data, we can't, it's hard for us to do that. So start your free collection code as soon as possible, as soon as you get off the phone here today. And then of course, why are we here today? Capacity planning. The what if capability of Performance Navigator to be able to take and share with you what's changed and what do you need in the future. If you grow by 50% or 30% over the next 3 years, what do you need? So our sources for data on IBMi is the historical data is put into a library called MPG-lib, and we're using the collection services data, which is typically turned on everybody's system and running in the background today already. All we do is we condense that data. We reduce the amount of disk space that data is taking. In the case of AIX, Linux, and VIOS, we're using Topaz if it's AIX, and or NMON if the NMON data is running. We prefer the NMON data. And then again, same thing, we're using cron to consolidate and condense that data into a directory on those servers. And then of course, we're pulling data from Power VM metrics also. And we're also pulling hardware metrics like CPU, memory storage, network information. Again, I probably didn't talk enough about the virtualization that we're looking at, Randy, but what are some things that you're looking at from Power VM?
Yeah, it's really important to, and we kind of mentioned some of these things, to understand, things like entitled, virtuals, capped, uncapped, dedicated, shared pools, NPIV, all these virtualization technologies, in helping understand what the data is telling you. And then obviously doing a what if and figuring out, okay, this is how it's configured on a Power 7, 8, or 9, and let's look at what it looks like on a Power 10. So you really have to have a pretty firm understanding of how all that works, because it's going to change. All those numbers potentially will change when you migrate from one processor to a Power 10, right? So it's important you really understand how that is. And second is that
sounds good. So
about capacity planning. Yep, go ahead.
Let's talk about why Performance Navigator for capacity planning. And Randy, I think we wanted you to talk towards what we're talking about here.
Yeah, so historical data, and we'll show you this, some of the value, but in having this historical data, and I guess it's either whether it's IBMI or Inmont, it's invaluable to figure out what's going on here, right? And it's really important. Now, what we do is, for example, we can look at server consolidation, migration to the cloud, on-prem. If y'all familiar with the dynamic capacity or Power Enterprise Pools 2, we can certainly do that, right? In a perfect world, we'd like to have a year. It rarely happens. We usually do a lot of capacity plans with 1 or 2 or 3 weeks or a month worth. And there is a certain amount of data already available on these machines. But there are a lot of things with Performance Navigator. If you talk about just the what if functions like server consolidation, we can do multiple OSs. We can consolidate any operating system. We can migrate HR, DR, prod. We can look at going to the cloud. We can do the dynamic capacity PEP2 analysis. And as I mentioned, it's not just about CPU. You also have to figure out memory and disk, so we can do that as well. So it's about all of the hardware, not just about CPU, which a lot of times people will just focus on the CPU piece, but it's certainly a little bit more complicated than that.
And then we derive our information, our sizing from the standard IBM CPW, if you're IBMI, the commercial processor workload, which has been around for 30 years, which I guess started out at 1, and I forget where we're at today, Randy, but each processor is up in the, I think, 20,000 per core or something like that. So
a lot,
a lot, right? And then RPerf for the AIX, we use that benchmark. And then we also use QPI from IDC when we talk about some of the cross-platform servers like the x86 and comparing them to running them on Power and what you would need over on Power, for example. And then, we talk about skills needed for capacity planning. You can't just do this area without understanding some things, right? And it really matters to have an expert helping you out. And that's where, Randy and our team comes into play. They have knowledge in understanding the hardware, what models, what restrictions, the IO, the memory, things like that. As we'll show you in our live demo today, you have choices when you say, I want to go to a Power 1024. Which one are you going to go to? You need to understand some options, things like that. And then storage and hardware, internal, external, models, storage options, all those things come into play. IBM Power VM, desired virtuals, virtual shared pools, capped, uncapped, LPAR activity. I mean, you need to understand those things. And then, of course, the various operating systems. You might be looking to put IBMI on a 1055. Guess what? You can't do that, right? I mean, that's not an option, right? Or you want to run it on an SAP server or AIX. You have to understand what the restrictions are on those. And then, of course, cost and software licensing. As we talk about PEP2, there's definitely things to come into play there, and pricing and configuration related to, what does it look like when we go to the cloud? So, and then Randy, you're used to the what if. What's the methodology, and what is the what if function? And then we'll get into our live demo.
You bet. So basically there is, even though there's a lot of, I'm going to call it technology, as Tom said, benchmark math going on at some point, there is a methodology. And obviously one of that is taking advantage of historical data. So we have an exclusive thing we call an average day. So we can actually figure out what your average 24-hour day looks like. Most of the time when we do capacity plans, we usually get conservative and we pick a peak day. So we scan your data and figure out what day used the most, CPU, right? And that is somewhat subjective because you could have an anomaly and so forth. So that's sort of one of the things we do. We usually do what we call a perfect storm. So let's say you have 10 LPARs. Each of those could in fact be a different day. And again, that's being conservative. We can get less conservative if we needed to, but there's a lot of what if functions that mention some of those other technologies, like consolidating multiple OSs, normalizing different intervals. What if you have one IBMI collecting in 15 and one collecting in 5? Well, you have to normalize that data. What about virtual shared pools? We're talking about saving dollars with software costs, right? What about multiple frame balancing? So let's say you have two 1024s. How do you balance those two 1024s? And then obviously, as I mentioned, when you go from Power 8 or Power 9 to Power 10, you are going to change your Power VM desired in virtual settings and maybe the virtual shared pool settings and those kind of things, right? So we are going to make those recommendations. We can do a PEP2 analysis, which basically comes up and says, well, what is the recommended number of base licenses? How many credits do I need to buy, or will I buy over X period of time, right? And don't forget about disk, and that includes NVMe technology and IO stats. If you're going to external disk, IBM uses something called the storage model, or STORM for short. We can certainly feed that technology the data, like ops per second, megabytes per second, and all that kind of stuff. So it's not just about CPU. You know, it's about memory and disk, and it's like the whole system, right?
All right, Randy, I need to make you presenter, so let me find that button. And
All right.
you are going to be live here. Let's talk a little bit about what we're going to present today.
Yeah, so, you know, as Tom sort of mentioned through the slides, it can get complicated depending on how many, partitions, how many operating systems, and it can get complicated. So what we thought we'd do in the short amount of time is really show you a quick demo of consolidating two systems, one IBM and one AIX, and from two different machines. And we're gonna see what it looks like on a Power 10, right? And to best show you what those machines look like, this is one of the reports that we create. It's called an enterprise hardware summary, but it's best for you to see where we're coming from. So this is a one page for executives that talks about, the whole enterprise, whether this is 2 frames and 2 LPARs or 20 frames and 200 LPARs, right? This is like a one-page summary of a lot of stats. And you can see that one of them is the IX and one of them is, in this case, is V7R4. We see there's 2 different machines, right? Now this is a Power 8, right? And this is an MME. So they're 2 different machines, 2 different operating systems. And if you come down here, one of the things I want to show you, we create a list here of these 2 machines. And you can see that this MME, which was the IBM I, had, there's 16 active cores. They have 15 IBM I licenses. There's 3 other LPAR. There's 3 total LPARs in this machine. And I'm only going to show you one today just for the sake of time. But I want you to focus on this machine that was 14 desired and 20 virtuals. And it was capped. So just note that where it's coming from on this machine, right? Which is this power. This is the AIX partition, right? It's got 4.5 and 8 virtuals, right? So just kind of sort of remember that, and we're going to show you real quick as a demo how we can, consolidate that. So coming back over here, this is the GUI. And you can see over here, blue is IBM I, green is AIX, black is Linux. So as that one chart showed you, we can consolidate any and all that stuff. Now I've already highlighted a group of systems, which are those 2. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new system that's asking me, hey, you sure you want to do this? And we're going to say, yep, we're going to consolidate 2 of these machines, right? One of them is IBM I. And again, they're 2 different models. They are 2 different, number of processors, and I'm just rearranging the screen here because make sure everybody can see it here. So first thing I like to do is come over to this LPAR tab, and I'm going to say set to current performance. Now, what that means, if the from machine is the same as the target, the source and the target are the same, you're basically going to wind up configuring it like it is. Now, you can see this is an 824, which is what the AIX machine was looking at. But you'll notice that, remember, the IBM I was on an MME. Remember, it had 14 cores. In order to get the same performance on this machine, you would have needed 17.22 cores. Of course, that's not what we're doing, right? But that kind of gives you an idea of what that one little button did. Right now, if I go look at the AIX partition, you can see it's 4.5 because that's how it was configured. Now, here's the reason why a lot of people, we like to have this data, because if you don't have data, you're sort of assuming your machine is either 100% busy or somewhat less. You can see that it's actually constantly over its 4.5. So this this partition was constantly using more than its 4.5 because it was going into its shared pool, right? So just real quick, so that's sort of how we just sort of look at it from that point of view. Now, what I'm going to do is come over here and just simply, well, which one do I want, right?
So
I
Randy,
can
that's a
select.
great question I have right now is, do partners come and say this customer wants to go to a 1024, or do they say, hey, what server should I be on? Well, how does that work?
Well, again, it depends on how many IBM I licenses or AIX licenses you have currently, right? Because you can
Right.
transfer those, right? This gets into where you need to understand how the dollar amount, because there is ultimately a financial question here. So, for example, for IBM I, it costs $5,000 to transfer a license. Well, do I need to transfer all of them? And of course,
Right.
SWAMA comes with that, right? Now, what I'm seeing is because especially if you're going from 8 to Power 10, a lot of like this 824 is a P20. You could probably run this on a P10 machine, right?
Sure.
Now, the other little thing, if you went to the 924, which is an equivalent, and let's just do that for the example, this is where you select the model. So you sort of have to understand what the customer's direction is. And so that's why normally we do this as a service, because we're in collaboration with the customer and the business partner or IBM to figure out what kind of direction. There's other non-performance related stuff that might decide which direction. But let's say we're going to pick a 1024, but now you have to pick which one. And this is important. This is something new. I don't know if everybody knew about this. The small 1024 is still a P20. All of the 924s were P20s. The two bigger machines are P30s now. So for IBM I and AIX, medium and large, this is important, financial wise. So it's important to understand some of these things. So we're just going to pick the P20. So it's actually the same as the other one. Now, the other thing is important is how many cores. Now, this particular machine, you can actually buy a single socket or a dual socket. So you have to know that, right? The other two machines, you cannot. You're going to have to buy both sockets. So I could literally come over here and say, I'm only going to have 12 machines, cores that are active. So regardless of how many sockets, you sort of have to say, well, how many cores are active? Because it does, affect performance, right? So now I'm going to come over here to LPAR and I'm going to say, tell me, give me the same performance, right? So again, now the target is different, right? So I'm just going to say on a Power 10, tell me what the equivalent is. And remember, this one was 14 to get the same performance, which is like 85% busy. We needed 6.02. Now we're never going to recommend you configure it this way. We actually have a rounding feature that tells you how we would recommend the desired and so forth, but now we're doing exact math here. If you went to the AIX partition, it says on this Power 10 is 2.25 instead of the 4.5 to get the same, performance. As you can see, it's 120. Well, maybe we don't want, this is too busy, right? So really, a lot of people say, hey, I want to have room to grow. I want to have a 50% room to grow, which is 14% per year for 3 years. That's sort of what I want to have when I buy this machine. So then you can come back over and you can say, calculate the default. So we just calculated that the IBM I, in order to have a 50% room to grow, is that you need 7.6 cores desired to have this. And if you look at the AIX partition, you can see it's 4.25. So actually, you're going to have slightly, less, or about the same than you had because you were actually overusing the 4.5 anyway, right? So that sort of gives you a sort of quick example of, and of course, the way we present this, we have a report that tells you what the desired is. And again, there's that rounding feature. We would probably suggest you make this, 4.3 or 4.2, this is fine, 7.6. If you set your desire, the biggest issue we see is people tend to over virtualize their machine, causing unnecessary overhead. So if you set your desired correctly, you should only round this up to the next whole number, maybe this, 2 whole numbers, depending on how, volatile or spiky your workload is. But if you set this correctly, that's certainly the idea here. So there is some choices here that you can certainly make. Now, the other thing I'll show you is this is a pretty simple example. You could have 50 or 100 of these things in here, 500 LPARs if you really wanted to. So it all works with that same kind of a concept. Now, the other thing you have to worry about is virtual shared pools, which is again used for software controlling software cost. So you can say, I'm going to create a pool of, now this is a 12 core machine. I want to create a pool of 5, and I'm going to put this LPAR in that pool. Tell me how busy the pool is. So you could do that. This is where you would balance your frames, say I'm going to have 2 1024s. I got 12 LPARs. I want them to be as balanced as I can, barring, production and HA, the same thing. So this is sort of where that's another option. So there's a lot of features depending on, what the customer situation is. That's one of the things that's neat about this job that I do a lot is there's no 2 capacity plans alike. They're all different, just sort of like fingerprints because of all these little different options, right?
They might all run on the same server, but they all got different workloads, right?
They got different workloads, and you can see this
storage,
is real,
right? Yeah.
Yep, and this is where we can show you this customer has, solid state disk, right, today. And, what are the options, right? Well, they could go to NVMe for IBMI. They could go to external storage. They could go to, IBMI hosting IBMI. There's a lot of things in storage. So this is where you really have to be a storage, subject matter expert. How does all the storage stuff work, right? You can do that. But what I wanted to show you, so this is a brief example and of some of the features and things that we do as part of this tool that can do for you. But what I wanted to show you is also that PEP2 analysis, which I don't know if people on the phone have ever looked at that, but obviously that gets a little bit more complicated. But what I wanted to show you.
So because there's some new people out there, what is PEP2, Randy? What does it allow you to do?
Yeah, so Power Enterprise Pools 2 is cloud, is IBM's method to have cloud-like pricing on-prem, basically. So in other words, pay for what you use, right? And the way it works, and this is, today you buy an IBMI license.
So you could have customers or MSPs, for example, using PEP2.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
And what they do is they track your IBMI licensing or AIX license across multiple LPARs, across multiple frames. And then they monitor it by the minute. So the idea is to figure out, well, how many base licenses do I need over X period of time, which is 1 or 2 or 3 years, right?
Yep.
And
that's can you demo that in about a minute?
Yep, about a minute. So what I'm going to show you is there's an example of real simple. There is 2 machines. They're both MMEs. This is the DR machine. That's the production machine. This is the DR machine. And what I wanted to show you is this DR machine's got 4 IBMI licenses, and this one's got 16. So they got 20 IBMI licenses across these 2 machines. If they go to Power10, what is the answer? So what Performance Navigator does is calculate what's called core minutes, because if you go over your base license, IBM's going to charge you by the minute, but for the core and for the operating system. So you need to figure out what is a break even of buying that 7th or whatever that license is over the base, right? So Performance Navigator actually calculates the core minutes, and then we have a spreadsheet, because that's where the money is, that calculates the dollars and cents. So these numbers here came out of Performance Navigator. These are core minutes. And you just enter those. And again, this happens to be, 1 frame or 2 frames, and you can vary the number of years. But basically, this system that had 20 IBM licenses, if they went to a Power10, the recommended base licenses is 6. If they migrate their license, and of course this is a 1024, they need 44,000 if they bought brand new license in credits, or they would spend that much money over 3 years. Or if they brought their own licenses, which is another option, is 25,000. So you can see this is where you get into the dollars and cents of the configuration. So again, real quick, it's complicated, but Performance Navigator sort of makes it easy because we do this math here, and you put it into the spreadsheet to figure out how many base licenses do I need, and then how much money do I need to put as credits, or will I spend over X number of years? So that's a real quick. You can see it's kind of complicated, but what makes it simple is Performance Navigator, calculates these magic numbers.
Okay. Well, Randy, I appreciate you sharing that, and that's kind of we're getting up to the bottom of the hour here, and we promised everybody we would make this a 30-minute demo presentation today. We do have one more polling question for you, if I can find my toolbar. And just from a follow-up perspective, how can we help you in many different ways? Capacity planning, are you interested in that? Performance Navigator problem determination services. I'll throw in our free security scans. We do that for IBMI and AIX. Education on Performance Navigator. We do have some online education now through HelpSystems University. We can provide that. And then also we do a lot with HA and DR, and believe it or not, Performance Navigator and HA DR kind of cross ways quite a bit. So we have a lot of discussions around that. And we have a question out there, Randy, and I'm not sure if you saw it from Rex, but can Power10 AI accelerator MMA utilization? I don't know
What
that
was the
we're
question?
looking at that yet today. Can you collect Power10 AI information from the accelerator that they have? Is that information coming in? Is that being collected by NMON or,
that is a
I guess
great
collection services?
question, and we are in conversation with IBM. I have not seen it. I'll put it that way. We understand
The answer is not
needed
yet.
requirement.
Right?
Yeah, the answer is not
Okay.
to my knowledge, but we are in conversation to both on the IBM side, the AIX side, to see if we can make that happen.
Yeah, and I don't believe that is fed into NMON data or IBM collection services, so we'd have to probably do something independent of that.
Correct, or get them to collect it, right? So, yep.
Yeah,
Good.
right. Okay. Yeah, that was a great question. All right, I'm not seeing any other questions out there, Andy. I guess you did a great job of, and as we came on the air, you were talking about a customer that is in the, I guess, government servicing student loans, and just the impact of the latest announcements by our government and the impact that had on the customer. So those are things that we can use Perf Navigator for too. So I'm gonna close our polling question, and then we will close out by just thanking everybody. Unless there's some last minute questions Randy and I can hang out on. Just to remind you, HelpSystems has certainly been doing performance analysis here through our acquisition of MPG about, gosh, 4 years ago now.
4 years ago, yeah.
Yep, it's been exciting, but we also do a lot of things on security and automation for Unix, Linux, IBMI. We can help you out with many different things. So think about us when you're talking to customers about cybersecurity, or if you are a customer, think about that too. And at that, I want to thank everybody for joining us again on yet another webinar from HelpSystems. We'll see you certainly this fall. And somebody's asking, was this recorded? Will the slide deck be available? The slide deck will be available. The recording will also be available. It'll be out on the HelpSystems website. Look for that, I would say by the end of the week for sure, if not tomorrow. So Randy, thank you again. Excellent job on the live presentation. Thank you.
All right, thanks everybody.
Have a great day. And good luck with Power10.
Yes.